What is the yield gap? Before explaining what yield gap means, let's have a look at the definition of the word yield. In the world of investments, yield is the amount of money in percentage terms that an investment generates. It is typically expressed on an annual basis as a percentage of the investment's cost or current market value. In farming, crop yield refers to production per unit area of land. It also means the seed generation of a plant. The yield gap is a term we use when comparing the performances of shares and bonds. In other words, the yield gap is the difference between the yield on government bonds, specifically long-term ones, and the dividend yield, that is, the yield on shares at any given time. The yield gap is only used when looking at bonds and shares in the same market, when you are comparing the difference between the average dividend and bond yields. Market in this context means the global or national markets for shares and bonds. The yield gap tells investors whether a market is undervalued or overvalued. In agriculture, the yield gap is the difference between a current farm's crop yield and what it could potentially yield if it were well run and had the proper technology. Yield gap is used to describe the huge gulf between the crop yields of the world's most and least productive farmers. American farmers, for example, typically grow up to 5 times as much corn per acre as their counterparts do in Africa. Thank you for watching this brief video on yield gap.